Hello, welcome to another career chat with Northeast Iowa Community College's College and Career Connection program. Today, we're excited to have Varick with us from NICC, and he is going to tell us a little bit about his history, how he got to where he is today at NICC, and he's prepared a presentation for us. So we're just going to let Varick take it from here. Go ahead, Varick.
Awesome. Give me one moment here. Let me get that share screen going. Perfect. And sharing. And you should be able to see my screen now. All righty. So my name is Varick Faust. I work at NICC, or Northeast Iowa Community College. I'm their information security officer. I did go to the Dubuque Community School District all the way through. In middle school, I was at Washington, and then I went to Roosevelt. So I went to two different middle schools. It was quite fun. So I got a wide range of everywhere. It was great. I have a website listed there if you wanted to scan the QR code. Otherwise, yeah, I enjoyed my job there. I previously was working in the help desk or tech support area, and I was doing a lot of stuff today. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to talk about virtualization in IT. It's not something that we actually get to talk about much in middle school, which is why I wanted to bring it to you today. I found it when I was in middle school. I was just looking into, career paths. I personally was going into engineering when I was in middle school because that was one of the options that was kind of very prevalent when I was in middle school. And IT wasn't really a big one at the time. So I thought, oh, I'll just go into that. And I thought virtualization was engineering, which isn't really what engineers do that often. So I was like, oh, okay. Maybe I'll need to do some shifting in high school. And that's what I ended up doing. So I looked into virtualization in middle school and continued it in high school. And then I was in TechWorks in high school, and we were able to do a shift when I found that I really enjoyed working with computers and how all that works in the background. So I wanted to go more deeper into virtualization with you guys and show you a little bit of the background there. And I have a cool presentation about virtualization that should you guys can do at home if you want, and teach you a little bit more about it. So let's get into it. Definitely feel free to answer any ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer them throughout. If you have to send them over to me, that's okay as well. I'd be happy to answer them if you have any coming up. So we're going to look at some virtualization stuff here. I have a little diagram over here about the different types of hypervisors that we have. So a hypervisor is essentially like a little operating system or application that's running on top of a machine. So you guys probably have like desktops and laptops or even phones. It's like that. You can run something called a hypervisor on top of that machine, like a phone or computer, and then that will start piecing out the hardware. You might have heard of things called RAM or CPUs. Those things are the hardware that I'm talking about here. It'll cut that stuff up and send it out into smaller machines, and that's what we would call the guest OSs. The ones that we'll be looking at today are the VirtualBox specifically, but a lot of companies also use the VMware Horizons. Here at NICC, we actually use VMware Horizons a lot as well, and that's something that we use for a lot of our users. It's a great way for them to easily access our network without actually having to be on the campus, which is a really great way for them to communicate this stuff without having to be on the network, which is a really easy thing for them to work from home. We all had to go through COVID, unfortunately, and this was a great way around having to have them come in and be close to other people while we had that issue. So we're going to take a look at a virtual machine right now. The cool part is we're actually right now in one. I have this running in a VirtualBox called Windows 10. So obviously this looks like a normal Windows 10 machine. Doesn't look off the ordinary. Got my Google Chrome, my Edge. But right now it's running on a very limited amount of resources because I'm running it off of my laptop. That's right. I'm running all of this off of a laptop that I just have. So I have 4 gigs of RAM and 2 CPU processors. So it's running a very minimal amount of power or hardware, but essentially I just split it up, and I'm going to show you exactly how I did that. This is actually my main desktop right here. So here you'll see the task manager and my hypervisor. The hypervisor is called VMware VirtualBox. It's a manager system. This is the icon that it looks like. And right now we have this one running. So what that means is I have my main Windows machine, Windows 10, running another Windows machine, Windows 10. Now, of course, running Windows 10 on top of Windows 10 isn't that impressive. It's like, well, you're just running the same operating system twice. That's not really cool. So I'm going to try and do something a little bit more interesting, and I'm going to run a Mac OS on top of it instead. So when I get this started up here, essentially what this is doing is I have a couple different operating systems that I already had preset, and we'll go through a small little snippet of how I did that. And essentially all it's doing is booting them back up. Now, when I created this operating system, we'll notice that there's been a big spike here on my memory. That's because it's starting to take up more memory to run this other virtual machine on my computer. So what's happening is VM VirtualBox is asking my computer, hey, I need a little bit more memory and I need a little bit more CPU power. And it's creating a new machine on my laptop. And now I have this Mac OS operating system running. So I can now start working in this Mac OS operating system. I can continue. It's going through the standard Mac OS building process. And I can continue on trying to set up a Mac OS operating system. It's the same process as you would going through any buildup of a computer. I can even do Windows 11 and Linux systems. And the reason why this is such an awesome tool is that if you wanted to go through and do testing, it gives you that opportunity to do so. And that's why I wanted to point it out to you guys here today. You also notice now that I close that tool, it's starting to go down on my memory. That means that memory is being released, and I now have the opportunity to open up a different machine. My computer here has 32 gigs of memory, so I have a good amount of space to kind of work around here on this computer. But depending on the machine you have at home, you might be able to work with different amounts. I've seen people use 8 gigs of memory without any issue on different machines. So I highly recommend looking into it, and we'll go in a little bit deeper. I can create a new machine here, give it a quick name, recommended memory. So memory is an interesting thing. So that's RAM, as they call it. Right now, what it's suggesting is 2 gigs of RAM. That's a perfect amount. I can give it 2 gigs of RAM. And then it's asking me about what hard drive I want to make. I don't need to do much with it because this is just a test. So we'll leave it at the 32 gigs. And then it's asking to make a virtual disk. That's no problem. I typically leave it at the VDI for this one. There's other options. If you want to get more in depth, feel free to do so. And then I use dynamic allocation. That just means that it's going to allocate space as needed, so it doesn't take up all the disk space on your computer. And then it's just doing one final check of everything, and I'm saying that's good. And then it creates it right here. And then I can go through and go to their settings, go to storage, and I can assign what we call an ISO. An ISO is what we call those Windows things. So you'll notice I already have a few here selected. A Windows ISO is that Windows image. That's what ISO is. It's a disk image. Previously, back in my prehistoric times, we had to use disks and put them in. But now we don't have to. We just have software that does it. You can get the Windows image off of the Windows website, which is really cool. Oh, I didn't click on it. There we go. Perfect. Now, all I have to do is start this one up. And then after it turns on, it's going to boot up into the Windows boot up startup sequence. It'll come up with its normal BIOS, just like any normal computer. And now we'll see I have Windows coming up. And that's just a good example of what we do. You'll see this in a multitude of things. And we're going to go over a few areas where this is being used at. And then we have the normal install process for Windows. So let's go back at that presentation. Awesome. So what I was showing was a Type 2 hypervisor. I had the hardware. I was running a Windows 10 operating system on my computer. And then I was using the VirtualBox to then create other operating system guest OSs. This way, I was able to put Mac OS, a Windows 10 machine, and any other operating system I wanted to on my computer in addition. And then I could work in those. It was a really slick and easy process. And everything I did was completely free. So what role do IT people have in virtual machines? So the help desk is typically the first line of defense. So when people are having issues on VDI, or if they're working in a virtual box, they'll typically have to make a call if they're running into issues that aren't necessarily working out well on their virtual machine. A good example is in VDI, sometimes we have users that are unable to get into their virtual machine when they're logging in, or there's sudden issues when they're stuttering. For that reason, we ask them to call the help desk, and the help desk will create a ticket for our network technicians. This is very important. The help desk is typically the first job you want to aim for because it gives you a great understanding of the entire landscape of the IT world. That helps you get an understanding of all the different areas that you could work in. And it gives you a great connection with the customers or the users that you're working with. What role do the security analysts do? Now, as I talked to you before, I work in the security landscape currently now. We work with a lot of the security management. What virtual machines do in security is amazing. They create a small shield around your computer. So a good example of this is, let's say you had something harmful on your computer. So for example, my computer might have had a virus on it. If I was working inside a virtual machine, that virus would have nothing to do with the stuff I was doing in that virtual machine. A good example of that as well, if I did something on that virtual machine that had a virus on it or opened up a phishing email, it wouldn't affect anything on the main machine. So it creates this cool shield between me and that virtual machine on my hardware. That means that nothing can get in and nothing can get out. And that creates a really high level of security that you can't really get in other areas. And then we also use different security softwares like Bitdefender, McAfee, and other ones like that. When you're in a security role, you want to go through and make sure that you indicate that type of stuff to your users, and then also help educate them about those phishing emails. So then we don't have them clicking on them. So what do programmers try to do when working with these virtual machines? That's typically something that a lot of people don't really see, but when you're trying to work with a virtual machine, that's a whole nother computer that you have to work with. So it's not as simple as just plugging in a USB and calling it good. You need some translation layers. So in order for me to plug in a USB into my computer and have it translate to another computer, I have to have a translation layer created. So then you just create that translation layer and then put it into the virtual machine, and then it reads what you're trying to do. Several companies already do this. In the medical field, we do this all the time. We have to create these translation layers so that if people are using virtual machines, that we can still print out our slips that we give to people when they're needing to come back. So that's a very common use. I don't know if you ever heard of a Dymo printer, but that's commonly used in the medical field. So Dymo printers are just normal run-of-the-mill printers that just print out, the time and date when you need to be back at your next appointment. So in order to make that transition, we need to print out that Dymo label for you through that virtual machine. What does our networks and system admins do to help manage this stuff? So obviously, when we're running virtual machines on a large scale value, we have to look at the massive amounts of servers we have to manage and making sure that everyone has enough of a network to manage them all through the bandwidth. So how do we manage that in a proper internet stint? So our network admins have to make sure that our firewall is strong enough to make sure that we don't get anything bad coming in and out. Luckily, with things different to our VMware Horizons or other things like that, we have to make sure everything's configured properly so our users don't have any issues connecting to the internet. So we go through and make sure everything's configured properly. And then we can also make sure having our servers are properly configured so then they don't run into any issues. Doing these steps helps make that experience a lot better for the user. Obviously, there's a bit of delay when we're moving. I don't know if you can notice it with my mouse, but there's a small delay. But luckily, the delay is so minuscule thanks to the networking admins and the system admins that we can't really notice it. And it's better than where it could have been. That firewall blocking is also very important because then it protects us from any harmful viruses and stuff that could be coming on and trying to tag in to our server connection. These types of things are very important, and there's even more detail that we could go into. Another good example would be routers. A lot of us have routers in our own home. I have a router sitting right next to me, actually. A router is something that we probably all have worked for. We've probably had an instance where our router probably stopped working and we haven't been able to get on the computer or our phones, and we had to go through, unplug, and plug it back in. Well, that's kind of similar to what a network admin has to do. they have to go through and make sure our network is strong and working properly. So if we ever run into an issue where our network's down, they have to go through and make sure that's corrected. So if you've ever done that, you've kind of done something that a network admin would do. So you might be a network admin of your own house. And then I wanted to talk about some high school resources that you have available to you. Here in the Dubuque Community School District, there's a lot of awesome abilities that you have available to you. When I was in high school, we had the student-run help desk, which gave you so many options of learning about how computers work from a hardware perspective. So that's about like the RAM that we were talking about, CPUs, and what kind of issues you can run into when you're interacting with them. And then there's other great things that you can learn from the robotics teams when you're learning about programming and team building. A lot of those things kind of interact with each other. I highly recommend that you talk to your school counselors about these things, because they're going to teach you way more things that may be available that I'm not even aware about.
Vera, can I interrupt you for just a second? Because this is so good. So you also have college and career coaches at the Dubuque Community Schools and every school district in our region, actually, who are with NICC, who can help you connect with work-based learning opportunities to go out to businesses and see what they do in the tech arena. I also want to ask you, are there specific classes that would be really helpful to take in high school that'll help you prepare for this career or for going on to higher education in the field?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes. So one thing I would highly recommend if you're trying to learn more about it is looking into working with local businesses, as you pointed out, working with your school resources of job shadows. I know that they have a class actually dedicated to maybe doing job shadows and internships. So I'm glad you brought up the internship option. I'm also happy that we brought up the classes here. So there's a lot of computer programming classes that we have aimed to the computer science side, which is brilliant. And if you're looking into virtualization, it's good to have a great understanding of programming and how that functions in the background. And that's why if you get a good background understanding of virtualization now, it'll help you even better in the future. So that's why I would highly recommend that you start that way. We have computer science as a class. It's an AP class at most of the high schools. And then they also have a couple other classes that I would highly recommend as well. I don't unfortunately have them all memorized off the top of my head because they didn't have them when I was in high school. So I do apologize about that. But they do have a lot of great classes available to you. And I would highly recommend taking as many of them as possible. And from my understanding, they are adding more.
Are there
dedicated.
Course,
yeah.
Eric, are there core subjects like math, science, English,
yes,
social studies that would be important as well?
So for the computer science AP class, it's a requirement to take Algebra 2. So math and science are probably good ones to get racked up on. I took 2 semesters of math back to back just to get a little bit more further ahead. And there's not really a, when you're in middle school, they don't really have the clear cut of where you have to go necessarily, which is completely understandable. When you get into high school, they'll have good dedicated options for you to go to, and then routes kind of depicted for you to go through. I highly recommend just talking to your counselors and letting them know this is where I want to go, and then they'll help you kind of figure out the classes that you need to take to get to that route, which is really amazing. I went to the process called TechWorks, and then they kind of created a landscape idea of where you could go. And then I went through that process with Kelly Cooper, and she would go through and give me a couple options when I was thinking about engineering. And when I wanted to transition, she was very easily able to transition those other classes into more technical classes.
That's a great example as well, where you can switch. It's okay. Yeah. So start exploring early so you have time when you're like, wow, now I think I want to go this route, that you still have some time, hopefully, to do that while you're in high school, because you do have a lot of different class options, a lot of work-based learning options, and you want to be able to take advantages of as many of those as you can, I think.
Exactly. No, it happens so often where I thought I wanted to do engineering, but then it turned out I was more of a computer kid, and I, just trying to figure out where that's at. There's so many different options out there, and that's one of the hardest parts. Just trying to figure out which job you kind of feel like you really like working at, and that's where that job shadows comes into play. I think job shadows are very important, and I recommend students to do at least 4 to 5 in their high school career, just so they really understand where they want to go. Because when you get to that college level, you really want to have a good idea of where you want to go. Now, you have options to change your job or your trajectory in college, but I still think that you want to have a good idea of where you want to sit at in college. which is why I always recommend at a high school level to do as many job shadows as possible. And an internship would be great too.
Absolutely. So talk to us about those college options. What do you need? Do you need a certificate, a diploma, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree? Does it depend on which field you're going into? What are your thoughts on that, Barrick?
No, it's a good question. A lot of students have these types of questions, and I think it's a very hard one to answer in some cases. But it depends on those degrees that you wanted to go for or jobs that you're looking for. In the IT landscape, it's actually a little bit more lenient. I think you could probably easily get away with a 2-year degree in a lot of these types of positions. So, for an example, if you're looking for, and I can actually go back on the slides here just to show you, if you're looking for a system network administration degree, I think a 2-year degree will work perfectly fine. A roommate of mine actually has no degree and is able to work in these type of positions because he's able to learn these types of things and move forward. Another technician of mine has a 2-year degree. NICC actually has the 2-year degree for these type of positions. So if this is the area you want to look into, I highly recommend a 2-year degree, and that should probably do fairly suffice on those type of ends, because it's so specific and it's IT, there's not a very great structure yet created of how we can educate students on how we want to do it, which does mean that there's a lot of stuff on us that we have to learn. IT is changing every day. Tomorrow it's going to be different than it was today. So we have to kind of also take it upon ourselves to learn more, which is something I had to do as a middle school student and a high school student. And now as working in the job, I still have to do.
Lifelong learning is so important in so many fields, but particularly in yours, that sounds like, Barrick.
Correct. It is a requirement. So if you really love learning new stuff and new concepts, I highly recommend looking into IT. It's every day there's a new thing going on and a new technology being created. Technology has been one of the highest grossing things being created, and that's the thing that makes it such an interesting job to work in. There's never an old thing. There's always a new thing that you have to work on, which is something I really enjoy and why I went into the job, because I thought it was cool to work with new stuff every day.
So this is a fascinating conversation, and we're going to definitely pull this out. I mean, it'll be available all the time for students and educators, but for Computer Science Week in Iowa, which it is currently, every year, I think we can refer back to this, Barrick, and I want to make sure we hit all the questions on our resource sheet here. So you need lots of technical skills and continuous learning. But what are some employability skills that would be really important if you want to go into this field?
I'm glad you brought that up. And that's kind of why I brought up the robotics team here previously. One thing that I think they kind of get known as for the first robotics team is they're like, oh, it's STEM, you're programming, you're building a robot, it's all about building and programming. One thing they don't get really considered about is all the communication you have to have in order to build a robot. So that's why I talk about the communication. Help desk, for example, that's all about communication. I think communication is one of the main things you have to be looking at if you're looking at a career in IT. One of the first stepping stones in IT is help desk. Help desk is about communicating with other customers or users. And that means you have to take the technical skills you know and communicate that to those people. And they may not have that technical knowledge that you do. Their job has a whole other slew of things they need to know. And then you need to know your technical skills. So you need to communicate that effectively to them. So how do you do that? You have to be able to break it down a little bit more simply and make it easier for them to understand. And that's obviously difficult, and it's a lifelong struggle when there's new technology being built every day. So you have to take that and communicate that more effectively. Now, of course, that's not an easy job to learn, which is why I always recommend taking more speech classes, musical plays, those type of things, any drama type stuff. That really helps you kind of invigorate it a little bit more, helps them get a better understanding of, enjoying that conversation or listening to the conversation as well, because that then makes it a little bit more interesting on their part. Because obviously, hey, something's broken, I'm upset, I need you to calm me down, kind of comes up when you're on a call on a help desk. So how do you do that? You have to first de-escalate the issue and then give them a possible solution and tell them how you plan to attack that issue.
Definitely some emotional intelligence there too, to help people like get past that frustration, so you can troubleshoot and get that solution for them. Fantastic. I think communication is key for just so many things, but really important because we don't all understand technology at the same level you do, Barrett.
Exactly, and that's it's not expected of you guys, I think, to know technology to that level, in my opinion. We should be understanding of that, and we should also make sure that we are aware that you're not frustrated at us, you're frustrated at the issue. That's the other thing. Just being understanding alone is also pretty good. Having a good tolerance of understanding that you're not upset with me, you're upset with the issue, and I'm here to try and de-escalate that issue and make sure that we're working together. That trust level is also very important.
Absolutely. So tell us about the working environment for this career. Office, obviously, different office environments. Are there work from home options? Are there situations where maybe you'll be in a career where you would be outside? What are the different options there for environment?
That's a good question. There's a lot of different options now, especially due to COVID. It kind of supercharged that working at home option that you mentioned. And I do think there's a lot more working at home opportunities. It does depend on the business. So in terms of the help desk, if it's just specifically a ticketing system where you're creating tickets and taking phone calls, staying at home seems like a higher probability nowadays, where you're just going to be filtering those phone calls, trying to work with people over the phone, remoting onto their computer, and solving those quick issues. If it's more of I'm here to go and do a little bit of everything type of guy, which we would call more of a generalist technician, they might have to stay on campus or in the field. So that means that they have to run everywhere, fix some technical issues with screens or projectors. For a school example, if we have a teacher who has a projector issue, you would have to run down and fix that. So those type of issues, you might have to be more on site at that point. So that's why it kind of depends on the business. So there's a lot of flexibility though with that, and that's what makes it really an interesting career option, because typically in some careers you kind of have to stay on one line and there's not much flexibility, but nowadays, especially in IT, there's a lot more flexibility that you have available to yourself. And that's why I really enjoyed it. I wasn't really just stuck in one silo. If I wanted to, I could spread out into this area if I wanted to, or move into this area. It kind of depends on what you want to do and what you feel more comfortable with. And that's, again, when I made the comment of moving more into the help desk first, like a good stepping stone, you get to see everything when you're starting at help desk. You get to hear about all the issues that are happening in one area. You get to understand how different systems are working. That's why I highly recommend, if you are looking into IT, to start on that student run help desk option, because especially from the Butte Community School District area, that gives you a great idea of getting those same types of tools of talking to people, understanding their issue, and then troubleshooting those issues.
Excellent. All right. So now a couple of my favorite questions. Tell us your favorite thing about your career, and if there's anything you do dislike about your career, Eric.
Ooh, that's hard. I like a lot of things about my job. It's interesting. I work very hard at my job because I really enjoy it. And a lot of people ask me why I work so hard at it, and that's typically the answer. I don't see it as a job. That's really where I'm at on it. My favorite thing would be the fact that I get to work with such a good group of people, which is very important, I should state. If you're looking into a job, make sure you enjoy the people you're working with and you enjoy the company you're working with. But even more than that, make sure you enjoy, learning about new stuff. That you have to be open to learning new stuff and knowing that you might make a mistake. IT people are not perfect, though we might pretend to be sometimes. We do make mistakes, and I always enjoy seeing that I made a mistake and then learning about that mistake and then making a mental note of it and then not making that mistake again. So learning new stuff is the best thing about my job. I learn new stuff every day. I never go to work and not learn something new. Which is absolutely amazing. I can't think of a job that I could do that's like that. So that's why I really enjoy my job. That's probably the best thing about my job, is learning new stuff every day.
Excellent. And it's important to note that everyone makes mistakes and it's a learning experience. It's okay, to own that and be like, ooh, that isn't how I wanted that to go. Let me figure out how to make that better next time or now. So
Right.
Is there anything you don't like? Because it seems like there isn't.
That's a tough question. Currently, I don't really have a good answer for that.
Okay, that's fair.
even like when you get those bad calls where people are just really upset and maybe unreasonable in some cases, sometimes it just makes me laugh a little. I'm like, I get it. They're having a tough day. So I
And
understand.
you make it better.
Yeah,
You
I'm
make
like,
it better, Barrett.
he made
Yeah.
my day better by giving me that understand. Like, I understand where he's at. I've been there. I've had a
Yeah.
bad day. We've all had bad days sometimes. Like, I understand where he's at. So even like the really potential bad days that you could have, like even them, I feel better about it. I'm like, yeah, we're still good. We're still doing good.
Well, we so appreciate your positivity and your passion for your career, as well as all the volunteer opportunities that you help make available for those in your community to experience computer science. So thank you, Varick. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. Any final thoughts for our audience?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to help. Always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to answer them or help students. That's one of my goals, is to help other people. That's how I got here. So always feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you, Varick, and I'm sure that we'll have some take you up on that offer. And we thank everyone for joining this special session of Career Chats with the College and Career Connection at NICC, devoted to computer science careers.
Thank you.